All right, so we can get started. Give me just a second. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today on our guest webinar. I'm Jenny Zhao. I am the host of these recurring webinars, and I'm also a customer success manager here at TuMeke, working with customers towards reaching their health and safety goals. We have a really special guest today, but before I get started on that, I just want to have some general housekeeping. We do encourage you to add your questions in, and we will have a Q&A section at the very end. So that will be under the Q&A section, the Q&A chat part of Zoom instead of the chat. And we will get to that towards the end. And just wanted to introduce Megan Cronis. Megan is a senior safety services consultant at Century Insurance with extensive experience in workplace ergonomics and safety. And for about 16 years, Megan has been dedicated to helping organizations develop effective strategies to reduce ergonomic-related injuries and enhance overall workplace safety. And for today's presentation, I'm sure many of us in the audience probably know a lot about collecting data and assessing risk on tasks, but there's usually a question of what's next, right? How do we prioritize which tasks to focus on, and how do we make the case to justify costs associated with any proposed solutions? So I'll hand that over to Megan to teach us a little bit more about her insight.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. And I also want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to learn a little bit more about ergonomics. It's a topic I'm very passionate about and hope to provide each of you with some key takeaways. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. As part of our discussion today, I'll be focusing on the process flow for not only identifying ergonomic risk, but using that information to effectively communicate the importance of solutions compared to the risks that you've identified through your assessment. So we'll do that by identifying some of the key information on TuMeke's platform, and then using that information along with some other key variables, and I'll show some examples of that to build that prioritization list. And then once you've done both of those things, you'll have all the necessary talking points to sell your proposal to the decision makers on your team. So first step is really just to identify the key information within the TuMeke platform. At the most basic fundamental level of ergonomics, it's important to understand the risk that's present in your workplace. And oftentimes key decision makers want us to be able to quantify that risk. So they're not just looking for, this task is good, this task is bad, this task is very bad, this task is very good. We have to quantify it in some way, which will then allow us to justify the expense of implementing solutions. So on the TuMeke platform, there are a variety of risk assessments available. And one of the two of the risk assessments that I use most frequently would be the REBA assessment, so the Rapid Entire Body Assessment, and then also the RULA, the Rapid Upper Limb Assessment. And these are posture-based tools that are quick, they're easy to use, but what they do and what's available on the platform is it will generate an overall musculoskeletal disorder risk. And so that's what you see there at the top of the screen. In this particular example, we've got a high risk or a score of 8 using that REBA assessment tool. But what the platform also provides you is a score or a breakdown by body part. And so this is nice. Once you start to think about solutions, we need to determine what body part we need to target in order to get the greatest sort of bang for our buck. If we, in this example, if we fix the posture of the trunk, then we have the biggest opportunity to reduce that score. So that's a nice feature on the platform. And oftentimes if you get through the assessment and you're starting to brainstorm solutions and you get stuck, this score by body part is really helpful because it helps you really kind of target what posture exactly needs to be corrected.
And for those of you who are wondering, who are not as familiar with Reba, all of this is actually has been designed by, industry level standards, and they were able to use a certain variety of factors to add up the score in general. So you're able to that's why you break down each body part and look at the joint angles and are able to actually get a final score for each of those, which then contribute to the overall score.
Yeah, all the assessment tools that we'll talk about today, they're all leading industry recognized. They are not necessarily like TuMeke's tools. They are tools that ergonomic practitioners use day in and day out with or without TuMeke. So it's an industry recognized tool, which can also be a nice selling point once you get to the point of needing to communicate your concerns and develop solutions.
Mhm.
One of those other tools that's also available within the TuMeke platform is the NIOSH lifting equation. And if you're on this webinar with a occupational safety and health background, this is a tool that I'm sure you've heard of. It's one of the most widely used ergonomic assessment tools. So it is available in TuMeke. And what TuMeke will also do is similar to the score by body part, is it will indicate at what variable is driving the high score, whether it's the vertical position of the load, the horizontal position, the distance between the pickup and set down point, the frequency, so how often we're asking employees to lift a load. And then in this case here, you'll see the asymmetry or the twisting of the trunk. That's what is driving that high score. So again, allows you to sort of pinpoint at what point in the task do we need to make a correction or develop a solution for.
And Megan, I love that you're emphasizing these other, like I would say, sub scores, because usually when with NIOSH, most people are used to getting a recommended weight limit, which is the upper threshold, and then compare it with their current load, which is the lifting index. But
Sure.
then oftentimes this extra section gets overlooked, I'd say. But it really can provide clues on what's actually contributing to that score. So I'm really glad that
Absolutely.
you're highlighting this part as well.
And then the final tool that I'm just going to talk about here, available in TuMeke, is the revised strain index. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the strain index, it's an assessment tool that looks at the hands, wrists, and forearms. And we also have a few variables that factor into the overall score here. We have frequency or efforts per minute, the posture that the hands are in while the employee is completing the task, the amount of time that they spend completing that exertion, and then finally the intensity or the force that's required to complete the task. And so in this case here, the intensity or the force is what's driving the higher score from a strain index perspective. So each of these tools, TuMeke provides the snapshot of overall risk and then the different variables that contribute to that risk, whether it's posture, force, or frequency.
Mhm.
And then the final thing that the platform, the TuMeke platform provides that I think is nice, and they're able to do it because you are collecting videos and uploading those through the software, is it gives you a breakdown of the amount of time that different body parts are in acceptable, low, medium, or high risk. And so again, going back to the score by body part, this is another way that we can analyze the job and see just exactly, at what point in the task do we need to fix or develop a solution. So in this case here, we can see that the next score, 40% of the time it's in low risk score, 34% of the time it's in a medium risk. And then again, going back to that trunk, we see 17% medium risk and then another small chunk there in the high risk. So it's just another set of information that can help you tell your story to your decision makers on your team.
And I'm really glad you highlighted this one. We would say this is kind of our TuMeke special in that it's
Mhm.
basically for Reba and Rula in particular, it's assessing every frame. So the original REBA score usually looks at one particular point in time or a frame or a posture, and it can collect multiple ones and you can add your own. But this is a really great insight into the entire clip. And as Megan mentioned, you can see where originally it said the trunk was really high, but you can see that the upper arm and the wrist may also need to be looked at. But then maybe lower arm and legs are in pretty good shape. So I think that places some of this into context of the entire clip as well.
Yeah, and what I find too is sometimes you'll do your assessment, you'll get all this data, and in the earlier slide, it showed where the trunk was the body part that had the biggest impact on the overall score. And you'll talk with the team, and a decision will be made that, hey, we can't fix the trunk posture. It has to be that way for now. Or maybe the solution is more of a long-term solution. It requires a capital expense, so on and so forth. So then what this tool allows you to do is say, okay, well, can we go to the next highest body part or next highest area where the person is spending the majority of time in a medium or high risk. So you can kind of work your way down the list based on the solutions or controls that are available to you at the time.
Absolutely.
Okay, so other than score, and the score is very important, but we also have to think about what's important to our organization, and or what are some other indicators that a task may be high risk from an ergonomic standpoint. And these are the variables that are going to help build our case. So I want you to think about a few other things. And one of those is the number of employees that perform the task. So if we do an ergonomic assessment on 2 jobs and both jobs come back as high risk, but one job we have 5 employees that perform the task, and another job we have 100 employees that may perform the task. Having that information, documenting that information is going to allow us to prioritize one over the other. And we all know organizations have a limited number of resources. Not everybody can go out and spend millions of dollars on ergonomic solutions. So having these other variables, keeping them in mind, and again, potentially even documenting them will allow us to just make more educated, better decisions on just exactly what to prioritize. So number of employees performing a task is one of those. We also want to look at the injury history. So yes, no, whether or not somebody has had an injury in the past can also be a good indicator. If we don't fix it now, then we can reasonably expect that that same injury is going to happen again.
Absolutely.
You can also look at injury cost. We know based on years of claim data that trunks and shoulders tend to be the more expensive injuries once they do occur. They're very hard to treat long term. And so we can take a look at if we have had injuries in these specific tasks, what exactly has that cost the organization. We can also look at employee complaints, even just employee suggestions. Some of you probably have some employee suggestion boxes, or that's part of your overall employee safety and health program. And so we can go back to our employees and find out what are their complaints, what are some of their suggestions. Those two can be tied together to determine where employees are feeling those aches and pains. And then we can also look at turnover. In my experience, I find that employees with the most, or tasks with the most physically demanding jobs, they tend to have the highest turnover rate. And so turnover can be a great indicator of ergonomic risk as well. And for most of you, your HR departments will have that information and can provide that to you as part of this process. And then lastly, we will talk about the cost of the solution. So again, if we've got 2 assessments that we're looking at, 2 tasks, they're both ranked high risk. Maybe they both have the same number of employees performing the task. Well, what is the cost of the solution? If we've got one solution that costs $1,000 and another solution that costs $50,000, the likelihood of us being able to get that $1,000 solution approved, implemented is obviously a lot higher than one that might be more expensive, may require more sign-offs and that sort of thing.
And this is an amazing list. I think it really puts into consideration all the other everything else to look at beyond just the score. And I like that you're shining a light on this. And it kind of gives everybody in the audience some inspiration to kind of look within their own data beyond just their TuMeke score to see how else we can
Sure.
quantify what to prioritize.
Yeah. So all of those variables I just talked about will help you build your prioritization list. So once we've determined what variables we want to use, we can start this process. And there may be other variables that I didn't talk about that you think that might be important to your organization. And this table that I use with my customers, it's obviously very customizable. It's just a simple Excel table. So you can add additional columns to this table. You can take some of these off if you don't like them or you don't think that that will speak to your leadership teams. And so really just what it allows us to do is help build that priority. I think one of the common, I won't call it a problem, but roadblock that I find customers run into is they get a TuMeke license. It looks really cool. They're very excited about the software. And so they go out and they do 100 ergonomic assessments. But then they're
Mhm.
left with 100 scores and 100 tasks that they need to evaluate. And it can be a little overwhelming and you're really just not sure, okay, where do I go from here? What do I do next? I have of the 100 tasks I looked at, 80 of them scored as medium or high risk. And so by having this table, and you'll see here how I color code the variables based on whether or not it indicates a higher risk for the task. So it really kind of helps streamline the process based on what's important to your organization.
And just a small comment, but I love the color coding as well. It makes a big difference when you're looking down an Excel sheet and it's all just one color. And this is really visual. And also, I think when you share with other people, they're able to also really quickly understand where you're
Yeah,
looking at, where you're directing your focus as well. So
yeah,
small but
exactly.
important kind of
Mhm.
detail there.
And so you'll see here, just if you look at my two examples, we've got our screw shooter task and we've got our unloading a finishing tank task. The screw shooter scored a 6, medium risk. The unload finish tank scored an 11. And if you were simply just using the risk score, you may think, okay, we need to address the finish tank operation. But once we look at the other variables, we see that, well, in the screw shooter task, we've got 15 people who do that task compared to 5. We've had an injury in this task before, and we haven't in the finish tank. And then you can, go down your list of variables and make a more educated
Mm.
decision. Sometimes when I, talk with customers about this list, they'll say, okay, what's the threshold? At what point do we have to prioritize it as a number one priority? And there's no threshold, there's no right answer. You have to decide what that means for your organization. So make that determination on your own. And just as long as it makes sense to you and it makes sense to the management team that you're trying to sell the solution to, then you're all set.
Mhm, and yeah, just to emphasize that too, everyone is different, in terms of number of people they're overseeing as well, and maybe it's helpful to also look at your end points, right? Like, what's the highest there's been in terms of cost, in terms of people who are working on it, what's the lower threshold, and that can help give you a little bit of a structure and a spectrum
Sure.
to work off of in terms of determining what's low, medium, high.
Exactly. Yep. So one of the variables that we haven't discussed yet is the return on investment for the solutions that we have developed. And TuMeke has a great free tool that's available to the public. So you do not need a TuMeke license to have access to the return on investment calculator. And so if you just type TuMeke ROI calculator, it will be the first available hyperlink. And so I've taken some screenshots of the calculator and I'll walk you through it now. So when you open up that calculator, it will ask you for a job name, number of people in the job, and their hourly wage. And so you'll go and you'll put in your own organization's information for that. And then the next step is to determine or estimate the cost of injury. So here, if you've had injuries for that task in the past, you can put in your company's exact data for those injuries that you've already incurred. If you haven't had any injuries in that area, there's a drop-down list based on the type of injury, and you can select that based on that body part risk. So if the trunk was a high score, then you can select a trunk or a back injury, back strain. If it's an upper arm, shoulder high score, then you can select rotator cuff injury. So, and then there's also an option for just general strains and sprains. So that's available too. So some of this, you may have to guess and make a good guess based on what injuries could occur. But if you've got those injuries, you've got that data from, historically at your company, then you can go ahead and put that in too. And when you
Yeah.
select, oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, I agree. If you can put your own in, it's more powerful, but if you don't have them immediately available, just, the data that goes the numbers that do go in are pulled from OSHA,
Yep.
safety pace calculator, so it's just national averages and whatnot.
And you can also, so the formula for indirect cost is 1.1 times the direct cost. I've worked with some organizations, they don't like to include indirect costs in ROI because it's sort of one of those intangibles. So you can just set that to 0 if you want, which I think is a nice feature, because not all leadership teams like to have the indirect costs built into the calculator. They want actual numbers.
Yeah, and that's fair too.
And so then once you get to the next page, you can type in the solution that you're proposing. You can select what the equipment cost is, any recurring training or engineering costs. And then you'll also have to select what you believe the effectiveness of the solution is, and then whether or not you'll have any productivity improvements. Maybe your solution will allow the line to work faster or move faster. And so you can make that selection. Maybe there's really no effect on production, and so you can select that as well. And so those are some other inputs that you can make. And then you can also stack other solutions. So maybe you have 2 solutions for the same task. You can build both of those in. You don't just have to do one at a time.
And that way you can compare different options and low
Yes.
cost, no cost, or
Yep.
2 different, yeah, tools.
And so once you do that, you'll generate this ROI worksheet, and that'll provide you with the savings breakdown and the return on investment based on the cost of your solution and the cost of your injuries. And so then there at the bottom, you'll have the total annual cost if the solution is not implemented, and then what additional sales would be needed to cover those cost of injuries based on an 11% profit margin. And you can edit that profit margin based on your company's specific profit margin as well. But it will use a general 11% if you don't change that for your own company. So based on that calculator, you can also add that as an additional variable or column onto your prioritization list. So again, you can play with this worksheet for whatever is best for your organization, whatever makes the most sense. And then once we've got our prioritization worksheet built out, we really have to just then we essentially provides us with our strategy for communicating the importance of solutions to our management team. So we've got our baseline scores, that's that initial assessment that we've completed. We determine what those other key variables are and input the numbers for that. Then we can go through and use that ROI calculator, implement our controls, and then lastly, we can measure our performance. And what does that look like? Because I think it's something that often gets missed is once we've worked the whole process, we've got our solution implemented, do we ever really go back and measure just how successful the process was and then communicate that to our employees or to our leadership team? So I've got a quick example up here for you. There's a list of tasks here that you see on the right. Then based on that prioritization worksheet, we selected 8 tasks that we determined were high priority. And we developed and implemented solutions on those 8 tasks that you see highlighted there. And then once those solutions were implemented, then we went back and reassessed those jobs using TuMeke, filmed those jobs again with the control in place. and we were able to see a 40% reduction in overall risk just for those 8 tasks. And so again, I can't stress the importance of measuring your performance, because it will help you you want to build on your performance, and it will help allow you or give you the means to continue your efforts. And these were the top priority tasks based on the initial assessment. Now these are done. Okay, what are the next 8 that we can look at? Or
Mm.
do we have additional tasks that we want to assess? And it really kind of helps break out the process so it doesn't feel so overwhelming.
Absolutely, and I love that you did break it down to 8, right? That's a manageable number for this client in particular, and it gives you, it sets you up for success in a way, right? So you're able
Exactly.
to actually take action, implement those solutions, and then measure it easily. If you went and just started doing 50 at once or even 100, right?
Yes.
It
It's
it
very
it just
overwhelming.
becomes
Yeah.
yeah. You don't get that quick win in order to continue on with this workflow. So yeah, before and after, I definitely agree as well. And even using the improvements feature as well to measure that if you don't do an Excel sheet. But I think that having this separate sheet, just it's really meaningful, to be able to save a 40% reduction from one year to the next, given your solutions. That's pretty powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what does all that translate? What does risk reduction translate to? And aside from employee morale, turnover, all the things that can sometimes be a bit intangible, but eventually it does translate down to dollars and cents. So this is just a simple example of some claim loss data for a manufacturing client. This is very typical for any in the manufacturing environment, to see strains and sprains as their top loss source from an incident severity standpoint. And so in the last 5 years, this customer spent $2 million on strains and sprains. And so if we start, sort of transposing those risk reduction numbers, 40% of $2 million, $800,000 that they're able to potentially save just by following this process.
Mm. And I
And
like
so
that you built in these actual numbers because, sometimes it's easy to not think about how much it actually costs, or maybe it's just not in your department, but it's important to be able to get this sort of information, because they are they're significant numbers. They're not just,
yes.
a drop in the bucket.
Yes. And they can also be much higher. I mean, depending on what
Yeah.
industry you're looking at, these numbers can grow considerably, even from this dollar amount. So how long does this process take is one of the more common questions I get we start this process, and that really is highly dependent on how quickly your organization is willing to make changes. Some of you are sitting there, and any kind of solution requires 10 sign-offs all the way up the chain. And some of you are sitting there, you've got a budget already set aside for ergonomics, and you're able to do this fairly quickly. So, I say anywhere from 3 to 12 months, just depending on how complex your organization is, and then also how many tasks you decide to prioritize as, your top priority in that first go around. So be patient with yourself, be patient with your leaders, especially if this is a new process for your organization. But I think once you get some of those quick wins early on, you might find that the process goes much quicker the second time around.
And that's a great point to just keep it realistic, right? You
Yeah.
don't want to just think that everything's going to happen super quickly and then get discouraged or frustrated. It is important to understand your company's processes and a lot for that time, and that way you can also work more effectively as well.
One thing I want to just quickly share, I know we're getting short on time, but this is one of the success stories from one of my customers that I work with on a regular basis. And so you'll see on the left there, this is the TuMeke video, the assessment video prior to any solution development. And then you'll see there on the right, they installed a hoist so that this employee doesn't have to pick up this heavy object and then place on a pallet on the floor. And so
Mm.
just a simple kind of comparison here, you'll see they installed a lift device. The initial score was very high under using the Reba assessment tool. And with the hoist installed, it dropped their ergonomic risk down to a 3. So just A $6,000 hoist had a 72% reduction in overall ergonomic risk. And some of you may be sitting there and thinking, well, there's no way I'm going to even get $6,000 for a solution. And, just keep that claim OSHA pays data in your back pocket. Average back injury in the US is $35,000. So $6,000 hoist or a $35,000 back injury, I hope that's an easy sell in your organization. So arm yourself with as much of this data as you can to help sell this process to your leadership teams.
Definitely.
And then I'll end with just some tips for getting some of those quick wins early on. Number one, use the color scheme to highlight key variables. This process will end up generating a ton of data, and your top leaders don't have the time to comb through each piece. And so if you use that color scheme, it allows your leaders to quickly look at all of that data, and it'll help you communicate it with few words. Start small, build on success. Start with 10 assessments and then get those 10 done and then do 10 more. Again, I mentioned earlier, one of the biggest roadblocks I see is companies who get excited about the software, it looks cool, and so they go out and they do a ton of assessments, and then they're kind of paralyzed by all the data and they're not sure where to go from there. So start small and build from there. And then always include your employees, get their buy-in. They are the ones that are doing these tasks day in and day out. There are certainly times where I'm out doing an assessment and I'm watching the job and I'm thinking, man, I really don't know what the solution is here. It's a tough one or a tricky one. And so I'll just go up and talk to the employee and I'll say, hey, if you had $1 million, how would you improve this workstation for yourself? And a lot of times they have the best ideas because they're doing it every single day. So always include your employees. And once you've implemented those solutions, share that data with them, share the score reduction, thank them for, being a part of the process. And it's a really nice way to get their buy-in. And then the last thing I'll say is you always want to minimize negative impacts to production. Any solution that is going to slow down production is going to be met with a lot of resistance. So I would much rather you implement a solution that doesn't impact production and only reduces your score by 20% than to implement a solution that impacts production, slows everything down, but it reduced your risk by 50%. So it would be a really hard sell if suddenly the process slows down. Now, that video example I showed, you noticed it took a little longer to get that part off the line and onto the pallet, but they had the time. Without that hoist, that guy was kind of standing around waiting for the next part to come down the line. So that it worked for them, even though the task itself took a little longer. So always keep that in mind. You don't want to slow down production. And so, yeah, just again, keep that in mind.
That's a great point. And this often does get overlooked, but we have to think realistically here, right? Like from my ergonomist standpoint, I'd love to see the score get as low as possible, but
Yep.
realistically speaking, and you speak from a wealth of experience and what you've seen, the items that green lighted aren't going to be the ones that, are going to hurt the company's
Yeah.
bottom line as well.
And I would say, especially initially, when you're just trying to get some buy-in, you're trying to get some traction, focus on those solutions that don't impact production. And then once your teams see the value, they see the reduction in their losses, they see the increase in employee morale, then you can start tackling those controls or recommendations that may have a small impact to production. But try to get those quick wins early and then build from there.
Yeah, great point. All right.
Any questions, Jenny, that we have?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, that was really insightful. Learned so much on my end as well, and I'm sure our audience would agree. I know we went a little over, so thank you all for still being here. We will, for those of you who need to hop off, we're going to just do a quick little poll, just to if you do need to leave, and then we're going to get to the Q&A as well. So you may see that poll pop up. All right, so let's start. Okay, on open questions, we have quite a few. So Greg says, oh, here we go. Thank you. Greg says, have you ever used this tool remotely, meaning customer provides a video for analysis?
Yes, so TuMeke has that option available, which is great. I use that frequently, especially because sometimes I get to a customer and that line's not running that day. And so TuMeke has the availability within their platform to generate a link. So I generate the link, I send it to you, and then you're able to upload that video into the platform, even though you may not have a TuMeke license, and then I can complete the manual or the assessment using the inputs with my license. So that is an
Mm,
awesome feature that TuMeke has, and it's something I use, fairly regularly.
thank you. Benjamin asks, what is the criteria for color on the number of employees? So I think you actually did answer that. I think he's referring to the Excel table and
Okay.
how we like prioritize what's low and high for number of employees working at a specific task.
Yeah.
Um,
And the score TuMeke has their color coding system, and that's based on the scoring criteria for that assessment tool. So the Reba tool, explains what score is low, medium, high, very high risk. And so TuMeke just uses that same criteria.
And for the other ones that the other variables that Megan added, that's just unique to your organization
Yep.
because 15 could be super high for one organization or
Yes. Yep.
department, or it
Yep.
could be very low if it's
Yes.
against 100. So yeah, I think that's where she mentioned like just kind of you might have to sort of make call this on your own and
Yeah.
figure out
Yeah.
what works best. Greg asks, how do you choose to amend the manual inputs within TuMeke? I'm not quite sure.
So
Um,
there
mm,
are manual inputs, things like
yes,
part weight,
yes, like
and then
activity score, like
activities.
repetition,
Yes,
static.
yes. So that's just based on the task itself. If the part weighs 50 pounds, I'm going to put 50 pounds in the manual under the manual inputs.
And I would also just say, currently, I know the way the software is, it sometimes it's easy to oversee to skip that step. I think we're making design changes to ensure that because that does make a big impact in the final score. So I would say, as a general best practice, make sure you do always look into the manual inputs, even if nothing needs to be changed. You can say no edits needed, but that does very much contribute to the score. Michael asks, what did the 5% productivity measure? How did the 5% productivity measure get calculated? I think he's talking about the ROI calculator. I think there were, I can kind of jump into that.
Sure,
There's
yeah,
actually
yeah.
a way to just break down the level of productivity increases. And of course, this is just an estimate. I think 5 might have been the most, like it's just speeds up production a lot. It can go down to like 1% or 2%. So that's just, I think just due to research how they came up with those general numbers, but you can change it yourself as well. It just manually, not through that the tool, but it's just kind of industry standard. Like I think you can select how the variation of the productivity, and that's how that in particular got calculated. All right, Grant says, are these tables done per assessment type, like REBA, RULA, NIOSH risks, and or where is this total risk score coming from?
Yeah, so I have a table based on the assessment type. For those of you that are very familiar with REBA and RULA, the REBA scoring goes 0 to 15 is the max. The RULA is 0 to 7. So you don't want to put both of those on the same table because a 7 is considered very high risk under RULA and it's only considered a medium risk under REBA. So you would want to split those tables out based on the assessment you're using. Otherwise, it's too easy unless you really know the scoring methodology behind each assessment tool. It's easy to get those numbers crossed and mislabel the level of risk.
Good point, and that is a common pitfall I've seen as well, where you just kind of combine it, and because it's not the same scale, it can get a little
Yeah.
confusing. Gabe says, could you please share the strategy slide once more? So everybody will be sent a recording of this so you can review it as well. And who can I contact in my company for injury costs?
That's going to vary company to company. Most of the time, that will be with your safety and health representatives, your HR team. In some cases, it might be your operations team. If you've got some companies will employ like a work comp analyst or a payroll specialist. So any of those jobs are going to have that information.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And if you work with insurance, of course, they
Yeah.
probably have a lot of that
Yes, that too.
information. Michael says, obtaining productivity measures can be most difficult to obtain. Wondering if this is an estimate based on observation, time motion measures, or perhaps from the employer if they have information to share.
So the options under that productivity improvement is no productivity gains expected, um, improves comfort and reduces fatigue, reduces wasted motion, or speeds up the entire process. So those are your options. And yeah, where are you going to get that data? That you may be doing some time studies. It really just depends on how detailed you want to get. I think on that section, most of the time, I just kind of make a general best guess on what I think will be the case, and don't overcomplicate it or overthink it. Um, that's my best advice.
And then you can also have like one measure that's super conservative and then another one that's maybe on the like ideal. So you can run both, and then that way you have a range as well. So you don't have to just
Sure.
focus on one or be contained to just one number. But yeah, great point there, Megan, too. So Jeff says, I may have missed it, but does the ROI calculator also allow you to enter any quality improvements with the implementation of the solution, scrap, product damage, reduction, and rework, etc.?
So there is the reduces wasted motion. I think that's the option that you'd be looking for from a quality standpoint.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then, of course, you can modify it yourself depending on other variables that your company requires. There are a lot of research out there, I think, as well, just looking specifically into ROI and how to measure it. And
Yeah.
it's a big it's a big field, and just because it is pretty nebulous, but yeah. Andrea says, what was the link for the free ROI calculator again? So that was just, you can Google it for non-TuMeke users. For TuMeke users, it's baked into the software. So with every task, every video you take, it'll be under the actions tab. And I really like that too, because then you can run multiple ones and it lives and it gets saved within that task and video as well. Greg says, great job, Megan.
Thank you.
Raul says, thank you. Gabe says, what is the typical workflow for assessing ergonomics for a new production line?
Hmm. So I can't stress enough about the importance of incorporating ergonomics into the design phase. It is much cheaper to address workstation heights, reaches, um, at the initial design phase versus designing the line without thinking about ergonomics and then having to go back and fix it, rework it. So I think getting somebody with some ergonomic experience, get them a seat at the table during that initial design and install phase and getting their input. Me personally, I use anthropometric data that is public data. It's out there to help me make those decisions and provide guidance on just exactly, how high should the conveyor height be? How far should employees be reaching? And using that data in the design phase. And then once it's installed, then let's go back and measure our performance. If you've incorporated into the design phase, that's it's almost like that's the point where you're capturing your baseline because you're already designing the line based on how the employee is going to interact with it. And then doing that, post install kind of double checking that everything looks good and making any minor adjustments from there.
Such an excellent answer. Thank you for that. That's really great point. And a lot often gets overlooked. It's just being able to
Yep.
do it earlier in advance, right?
Much
And
cheaper that
we
way.
yes, absolutely. And I'm glad to know that I think we have some customers who are engineers or clients, because they're not quite safety specialists, but they're engineers designing new production lines using TuMeke as well, or some level of risk assessment software. Matt says, hi, Matt Jeffs. Love learning from our industry experts with direct field work practice. Great job. Time well spent. Thank you. Greg says, oh, especially with remote consultations, that must have been a follow-up to the last question.
The link.
Last.
Yeah, if you have a link from a TuMeke license holder and you upload your video, everything we're talking about can be done remotely. I like to be on site and really look at the whole picture, but it's not absolutely necessary. It can be done remotely with a lot of communication back and forth in between.
Great point. We have 7 more questions. Thank you so much for staying
Sure.
later, Megan, and also for everybody else. Maggie asks, can you explain the 1.1 multiplier for the non-direct cost? Where does it come from?
Jenny, do you know why TuMeke uses 1.1?
I'm not sure, but I
That
think
is a common calculation.
yeah.
Where that comes from, I don't know. I've been doing this for a long time and it's always been times 1.1.
Yeah.
But again, it's one of those intangibles. It's hard to really quantify. I'm sure that's from years of research. I know that lots of organizations will use that same number to capture. I mean, I've even seen it as high as your indirect costs are 4 times your direct costs, which is really high. So I think
Yeah.
1.1 is a safe number to use that doesn't seem, too crazy.
And the under non-direct costs, it's like, it would look into turnover even, right? So the cost of like having to hire somebody else and the lost work days on that, the disrupted
Yep.
productivity, the absenteeism, also presenteeism of people being there but just not working as effectively. And I know that we did base part of our calculator off of Dr. Alan Hedge from Cornell University, his ROI calculator. So I'm sure one can dive a little deeper into that number, but that's a great question. And now it makes me want to go and learn a little bit more about how they came up with that number. But yeah, thank you. And Michael says, any thoughts on adding some additional Ergo tools to TuMeke? For example, Rogers muscle fatigue analysis or quick exposure check. So yeah, great question there. Yeah, our team is always looking into potentially adding more and potentially even giving you customization to make your own assessments and like variables. So look out for that for sure. And that's something that I think we'll be working on this year, or I know we'll be working on this year. Jeff asks, I could be wrong, but I believe the productivity estimates are based on Washington State Department Department of Labor and Industry series 100, 250 different case studies. So yeah, thank you, Jeff. I'm sure that is part of the these aggregated literature reviews and case studies to come up with that number. So thank you. Lillian says, thank you. This has been super helpful. Alan says, thank you for the information. Antonio says, thank you. Great presentation, Megan. Anonymous attendee says, what is the cost for TuMeke? So if you, feel free to email us info@tumeke.io and we can, talk to you more about that. Andy says, I have heard of indirect costs being as high as 2 or 3. So yeah, thank you for contributing that and sharing what you've seen as well. And Michael says, I believe, it comes from an old OSHA printout as well. So the
1.1, yeah.
Awesome. I think that is all we have, all the questions. Thank you so much again for staying later, Megan and audience. This has been such a great discussion, learned a lot myself as well, and so many good points to think about and integrate. So really appreciate your